All right, we're going to go ahead and get started this morning. Sandy, it looks like we're not seeing you. If you could come back to the stream. Sandy, if you're out there, if you hear us, our staff member Sandy, join us back. It says your camera is not connected. Maybe try to reconnect. But while Sandy is doing that, oh, there's Sandy. There you are, Sandy. We got you. We see you. Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Pat Kane, and thank you for joining us for another edition of our Mornings with the Museum programs. It is International Museum Day today on May 18th, and we are celebrating museums everywhere. And in just a few short moments, staff members and I, we're going to share our favorite museums with you, aside from the Museum of the Grand Prairie, of course, our favorite museum. But we're going to share our other favorite museums and why we love these museums so much. And before we do that, let's learn who is joining us for today's program. Again, my name's Pat Kane. I'm Public Programs and Visitor Services Coordinator at the Museum of the Grand Prairie, part of the Champaign County Forest Preserve District. Sandy, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Sandy. I have been an educator here at the Museum of the Grand Prairie for a long time, and I'm really glad to share a museum with you today.
Thank you, Sandy. Mark, how about you?
Hi, I'm Mark Hanson. I'm the curator at the Museum of the Grand Prairie.
And thank you, Mark. Sandy, Mark and I are going to be talking about our favorite museums in just a few moments. But before we get there, just a few things. Let us know where you're watching from this morning by writing that down in the comment section below. Always like to see where folks are tuning in from. Looks like Kathleen is tuning in this morning from Canton. So thank you so much, Kathleen, for tuning in. But other folks out there, if you're watching this morning or you're watching this later, the recorded version, let us know where you're watching from. Always love to see where folks are tuning in from. If you don't know anything about the Museum of the Grand Prairie, the Museum of the Grand Prairie opened originally in 1968 as the early American museum. And our mission is to collect, preserve, and interpret the cultural and natural history of Champaign County and East Central Illinois for all people in this area and beyond. A few things to also note, the Museum of the Grand Prairie is now open to the public. So come on in, check us out. We've been open since the beginning of March. We're open Tuesdays through Saturdays right now from 1 to 5 p.m. And feel free to visit Champaign County Forest Preserve District website, ccfpd.org ahead of time to learn more about how to visit, when to visit, anything else you may need to know in this time of COVID-19, a few things to prepare for. And to learn more about everything that we do at the Museum of the Grand Prairie and throughout the Champaign County Forest Preserve District, be sure to find us and follow us on social media or check out museumofthegrandprairie.org or ccfpd.org. Again, want to encourage you to let us know where you're watching from by writing that down below. And then also, we're going to share our favorite museums with you on International Museum Day, but we would love to know what your favorite museums are. So write that down in the comment section below, whether it's Museum of the Grand Prairie, another Illinois museum, another museum across the country, another museum across the world. Let us know what your favorite museum is, because we're celebrating museums everywhere on this International Museums Day and want to hear from you all too. So let's go ahead and jump into today's program, our staff favorite museums, and let's kick it off with Mark. Mark, I'll let you take it away, and I'm going to share my screen here. Oops, I'm going to actually go start with the website, actually. Go back here. Okay. Go ahead, Mark.
I'm going to be the outlier. I'm going to talk about a museum that is not in Illinois. But just to reiterate what Pat said, there are tons and tons of really great museums in Illinois. Pat and Sandy are going to be talking about two of them. But there's also an Illinois Association of Museums if you want to learn more about sort of museums across the state. So definitely keep that in mind. One of my favorite museums is, like I mentioned, is not in Illinois. It's in Dayton, Ohio, just on the edge of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And it is the National Museum of the United States Air Force. Their mission is to basically preserve the aerospace legacy of the United States Air Force. And you can see the facility there. It's pretty big. They basically span the width and breadth of aviation history, from the Wright brothers all the way up through current aircraft that are in the Air Force's inventory. So it's a really great place, really easy to get to because it's a government museum. It's also free. Parking is easy. So if you like airplanes or aviation, it's a really great place to go check that out. You want to hit some of my photos there, Pat?
Sure.
So as I mentioned, it's airplanes, a lot of airplanes. And as we know, Rantoul had an Air Force base for many years. And a lot of the airplanes that were flying around Champaign County and Rantoul are examples of where the airplanes are preserved there. In the museum's early flight gallery, they have an example of a standard J1, which was contemporary to the Curtiss Jenny that pilots would learn how to fly at Chanute in. It wasn't a very popular airplane because of that ginormous radiator that's right in front of the pilot's face. So that's kind of cool. There's connections to Champaign County in Illinois, especially in the early aviation galleries. How about the next one, Pat? And of course, World War II. And they have basically an example of every aircraft that flew in World War II that you can imagine. Some pretty famous ones like this one. This is a B-17, and it's actually Memphis Belle. This is the first bomber that completed 25 missions over Europe and returned to the United States. As you can imagine, that was quite a rarity. Airplanes didn't survive real long in that environment. And so this important airplane is preserved there, and they've restored it to make sure that it's going to last for forever. The next one, Pat. One of the things that I love about the Air Force Museum is they work really hard to create, I guess what I would call interpretive environments. Big artifacts like airplanes are sometimes hard to interpret. They're just so big. You sometimes get lost in their size. The Air Force Museum, I think, does a really good job of trying to set up these environments. So you sort of get a feel of what was going on. So this one is actually a small section that's dealing with the Korean War, and two of the most famous jet fighters from that war is the F-86, which is on the left, and then the MiG-15, the Russian MiG-15, which is on the right. What about the next one, Pat? And again, another really great example of sort of an interpretive space, an interpreted environment. Obviously, helicopters. The UH-1 Hueys were vital in the Vietnam War, and this environment is dealing with aviation in Vietnam. But the next one, Pat. And also, the Air Force was primary mover and shaker when it came to intercontinental ballistic missile development, and Chanute Air Force Base was the prime training facility for the Minuteman missile. And so the Air Force Museum has a missile silo exhibit, which shows the full scale, all of the major missiles that were and are in the Air Force's inventory. And the little tiny one at the bottom, looks like the shorter white one with the blue band around the top, that's a Minuteman missile. And those are the types of missiles that Chanute trained basically all of the maintainers for that missile were in Rantoul. Next picture, Pat. And last but not least, we go right up into some of the space vehicles as well. So they have the Apollo 15 capsule. That's pretty neat to see. So, you know, just through these few pictures, you kind of get a feeling of the scope and the breadth of the artifacts that they have on exhibit and their interpretation. And, you know, one other thing that I think it's important to add is in my career, I've had to work with folks, or I shouldn't say had to, I've had the privilege of working with folks at the Air Force Museum, both for research and with some loans. And they're just a great group of people that work there. And they do a really good job of preserving the little corner of history that they're responsible for, and making sure that we don't forget it, and that we pay give proper recognition to all of those men and women who have served and continue to serve in the Air Force. So yeah, one of my favorite museums, United States Air Force Museum of the United States Air Force.
Well, thank you, Mark. That's looks like an excellent spot to check out. Reminds me a lot, you know, you mentioned a lot about connections to Central Illinois and Chinook Air Force Base. Reminds me a lot of going to the museum in Rantoul on Chinook Air Force Base, you know, with the big airplanes and the hangars, and seeing the missiles too. One of my favorite spots in the Chinook Air Museum was, I believe it was an old missile silo that you could go down into, and seeing those missiles reminded me of that. And, you know, what better artifact to have, and what bigger artifact can you get than an airplane, you know?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
and I'm sure Mark would love to have an airplane in Museum of the Grand Prairie's collection, but not quite sure where we would stuff it
Exactly.
on our campus here. So really great. Thank you, Mark. So one museum, National Museum of the United States Air Force, Mark's favorite, our curator's favorite. Kathleen has chimed in and said her favorite is Smithsonian, of course, but also shouting out, forgive my pronunciation, but is that the Joslin Art Museum in Omaha, Nebraska? So those are Kathleen's favorites. Let us know if you're watching out there what your favorite museums are. Kathleen, let us know. Mark, let us know. And now we're going to move to Sandy. She's going to let us know what her favorite museum is. So with that, I'm going to share the screen again. And Sandy, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks. One of the favorite places that I like to go locally is the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. And while Pat just shows a quick video here, I'm just going to say a few wonderful things about it. So in the 25 years I've worked at the Museum of the Grand Prairie, I've learned a lot of local history about Abraham Lincoln. But my times here at this Springfield Museum have just been incredible, and I have learned so much about Lincoln that is not just local, really local, but all about him. And it opened in 2005. It's a very informative, inspiring museum, and definitely if you see that the picture that's up there right now is a very experience-based museum, and it has become our family's favorite grandparents' day destination with our grandchildren for many years. So as we move on, we'll see the picture right there of the beginning of, there we go, the opening there, the Presidential Museum. And when you go into the museum, one of the first places you enter this front plaza, which is a perfect photo opportunity. And Pat, you can put that picture up. So the wax figures of not only Lincoln's family here, but all the others are just breathtaking. And all the time you're there, you'll see children and parents and families and all kinds of groups posing there with Abe's family, having a great, great picture time. From the center there, you can see lots of the other exhibit spaces. And if we move, Pat, to the picture of the cabin area, so you can walk through this. It's of course a small cabin because everybody lived in tiny cabins. And this is what they actually had sent to them, an 1800s cabin from Kentucky that they took, that had been taken apart, and then they rebuilt it here in the museum. So it does look real. It does feel real because it was real. And it's a very immersing, you feel like you're right there with Abraham Lincoln. There's another shot of Abe with his two children, having a lot of fun. My grandchildren love that, kind of watching them playing sort of baseball there in the middle of the house. That was, of course, not his log cabin, but he didn't live in his tiny log cabin, of course, for his whole life. And then there's, once we move on to that one, there's a wonderful play area. I haven't been there, of course, for about a year and a half now. My grandchildren loved playing in it. Has some old-fashioned toys. Used to have a bunch of Lincoln logs that they loved to play in. There's also some exhibit space where you can learn an awful lot about politicians, editorials, different things like that. And then you go into this gallery, which is called, well, this show called Union Theater. This is about the Civil War. It's very real. And when my granddaughter was about 5, I had to take her out of here. She was definitely crying to pieces. So it's a very emotional experience. And there, I saw some other children not wanting to stay in there either, but she got older. She loved watching that too. They have another very cool holographic type of exhibit called The Ghosts of the Library. And there was a little part of this in the video that Pat was showing. You feel like you're right there, and the images, although they're not real people, certainly seem like real people, and you learn a lot about the library there. One of the other favorite things that we like that we don't have a picture of is the exhibit of all of Mary Todd's dresses. It's just fascinating when you watch those dresses, of course, in all the hoop skirts, and you think about how did she possibly manage to do some of the work she did with some of the clothing that she wore. It's a very nice exhibit too. They also have a great gift store. It's large. There were things that the grandchildren liked. There are things that grandparents liked. One of them in particular is a Lincoln lover and collector of things, and he found items here he had never seen before. So it's a very nice gift store to go to. Once you've gone through the museum, there's also other Lincoln like centers, different. There's the depot there where he gave his farewell speech at, not too far from the museum. A couple other places too. So if you like Lincoln, or some of your children or grandchildren are into it, this is definitely a great place to check out and get to. It's not very far away. So I hope you enjoy going there sometime. Do you have any other pictures, Pat, that we didn't put up yet?
We've got, just to show, much like we showed with Mark's, the website here. The website's got this really cool moving image right here showing, the campus and also the library that has, tons and tons of archival material for any Lincoln scholar or, amateur Lincoln historian that wants to check it out. And like you said, there's the depot and the whole general campus there. There's quite a bit in that Springfield area of this museum, and not too far from it, where there's the Lincoln neighborhood, where you could, of course, go to Lincoln's home and visit a number of other great sites. So, as Sandy said, what a great spot to go visit for any Lincoln lover, young, old, anywhere in between, or if you just want to check out a beautiful, historical space, a beautiful historical museum, not too far from where we are in Champaign County. This has got to be on the list to check out, which I want to go check it out because I hate to admit it, but I've never actually been there. I've been to the library for a conference once, but I've never actually been to the museum. and I need to go check it out. But from the looks of the website here and talking to Sandy and other folks, would be an excellent spot to visit for any lover of history or Lincoln out there. Okay, well, thank you, Sandy. Thanks for sharing that. And Amber also chimed in here related to Mark's discussion of the National Museum of the United States Air Force, and talked about Chanute Air Force Base. Chanute was one of their favorites as well. So museum used to be here in Central Illinois and Rantoul at Chanute Air Force Base. A lot of history there still. Okay, so for me, I'll wrap up the show here. One of my favorite museums, not too far from us here in Central Illinois, also is the Mclean County Museum of History in Bloomington, Illinois. And I actually went to Illinois State University for my undergraduate degree, where I was actually a high school history and social studies teacher, and studied there in Normal at ISU. And this museum was not too far from the Illinois State University campus, Mclean County Museum of History. And it's actually located, the museum now is located in a courthouse. Used to be Mclean County Courthouse, right on the square in downtown Bloomington. So it's a beautiful building. The building itself is an amazing artifact to go check out. And you can get inside and check out that dome up top, look up and see this beautiful dome, and the marble floors and the marble stairs, and just the architecture design of the building space is pretty awesome. And it's a pretty great piece of history itself to check out. So as I mentioned, I went to this museum a lot. I loved it so much when I was learning about becoming a historian and a history teacher at Illinois State University. And it reminds me a lot of what we are doing at the Museum of the Grand Prairie. Much like we tell the story of Champaign County and East Central Illinois history, Mclean County Museum of History tells the story of Mclean County and the surrounding Central Illinois area close to them, about an hour away from us. An hour west. And I was looking around, and it sounds like the Mclean County Museum of History, according to their website, the Mclean County Historical Society has been in existence for over 100 years. Got its start in the late 1800s. And eventually they got their first museum space in the 1920s, until they eventually moved to the courthouse space here in the 1990s. And in the courthouse now, they've got some really awesome exhibit spaces that they detail briefly on their website, some exhibit spaces for you to check out. So one exhibit space, much like Sandy just talked about Abraham Lincoln in Springfield. Of course, Abraham Lincoln is a huge piece of Illinois history, and especially Central Illinois history. And at the Museum of the Grand Prairie, we have an exhibit on Abraham Lincoln in Champaign County. And at the Mclean County Museum of History, they have an exhibit on Abraham Lincoln in Mclean County. So go check out those stories at this exhibit space in Mclean County in Bloomington, Illinois, to learn about Abraham Lincoln's life and the people he may have come in contact with and the impacts that he had on the Mclean County and the Bloomington, Illinois area. Another exhibit space is in what I believe is 5 gallery spaces titled Challenges, Choices, and Change. 5,000 square foot space that has a number of different themes in it, and a number of different gallery spaces talking about Mclean County history, whether it's farm-related history, the history of the culture that makes up the Bloomington, Normal, and Mclean County communities, jobs that folks had, where they may have worked in the area, and how all of those help tell the story of Mclean County where it is today. So one gallery space is called Challenges, Choices, and Change, Making a Home, as part of this exhibit space, this 5-part exhibit space, talking about where folks came from when they immigrated to the Mclean County area, and then what their lives were like after they immigrated to the area. Also, there's a nice exhibit space called Farming in the Great Corn Belt, which has a lot of agricultural implements and tools and stories on display about farming in Mclean County, as we know that in Central Illinois, farming is a huge piece of this area's history. Another gallery space is called Working for a Living, talking about the jobs and occupations that folks had and continue to have in McLean County and how those impacted their lives and the surrounding community in McLean County. And a new exhibit space, which I believe came out in the last few years, is a community in conflict, a really great exhibit space that talks about answering the question, the main question being who had the power, these power struggles in the McLean County community, these power struggles over issues relating to many issues that we still have in today's day and age. You know, history of social and racial injustices in the McLean County community area. And a number of other conflicts that occurred within the Bloomington Normal community that sound a lot like conflicts that occurred not only across the state, but across the country. So I really, really like this local museum because, as I like the Museum of the Grand Prairie, it talks about, you know, these major things that happen right in our own communities. And, you know, history, in order to find stories of history, we don't have to go too far. You know, we can just go to these beautiful, well-done community museums to learn about our history, and especially our local history, can learn our history of our communities. So that's a favorite of mine. Another reason that I also like the McLean County Museum of History is their involvement with the community. They do some awesome programs and events. One that they've been doing for a long time is the Evergreen Cemetery Walk. And this was a 25th anniversary image that I've found on their website from 2019. So it's been in action for over 25 years, but helps bring McLean County history to life. They bring visitors from the public, as well as also welcome students on school field trips in the Bloomington Normal area out for first-person interpretations of those who are buried in the Evergreen Cemetery. And there's so much rich history in the Evergreen Cemetery and the folks who are buried there. And it's a really well done first-person interpretation event. And last year, because of COVID, they took the Evergreen Cemetery Walk online, virtually. So, you know, they kind of pivoted, much like museums did across the country, to still bring this awesome community program to McLean County and its visitors last year. Another thing that I like about the McLean County Museum of History is, as I mentioned, their involvement with the community, but also their involvement with educators. You know, we try to work very hard at the Museum of the Grand Prairie with students and teachers in the Champaign County and surrounding areas to talk about history and help bring history to life. And so does McLean County Museum of History. As an undergraduate student studying to be a history teacher and historian, I attended and still attend every year their annual History and Social Science Teacher Symposium. Because although I may not be a high school history teacher anymore, I'm still a history educator, just in a little different sense. So it's a really well done program, and it's a collaboration between Illinois State University's Department of History, the Regional Office of Education over there in the McLean County area, office number 17, and then, of course, the McLean County Museum of History. And they've also hosted some of these programs and these conferences and these workshops at McLean County Museum of History in past years. So it's an excuse for me to not only go to this conference and this workshop, but to also check out this awesome exhibit space that is the McLean County Museum of History. So that's a local favorite of mine. And Mark mentioned the National Museum of the United States Air Force. Sandy mentioned the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library Museum, and I mentioned the McLean County Museum of History. I think one thing that's really great about the three museums that we focused on today is they're not too far. You know, you can take a short drive, even out to Dayton, Ohio, which is about 4-ish hours to visit these museums. And you don't have to travel to the big cities and to the big museums to find some really great historical museums. So as the world is opening up this summer, we encourage you to go out there and visit museums in your community, make a short drive, or, you know, travel farther if you wish. Of course, do it safely, and check out these museum spaces this summer because it's International Museum Day. We want to celebrate these museums, big, small, local museums, national museums, everywhere in between. So get out there and visit those museum spaces. Mark and Sandy, you got any final words for the folks out there watching?
Just have
I
a
don't
good
think so.
museum day.
Mark, what were you going to say?
Yeah, just get out and visit a museum.
Get out there, visit a museum, celebrate International Museum Day as best as you possibly can. And if you want to come visit us, we're open. We're open today, 1 to 5 p.m. Every Tuesday through Saturday from 1 to 5 p.m. And we're a free museum. So visit us or visit a museum near you very soon. But I'm Pat Kane for Mark and Sandy. Thanks again for watching. And until next time, we'll see y'all.
Bye.